Welcome back, brothers and heretics, to Grimhammer. Tonight we have some tell on Chaos Space Marine madness. Before we get into the video, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor or the Dark Gods. I want to thank you guys for support. I've been killing it like always. Now, let's get into the video.
The drop pod fell like a meteor hurled by a spiteful god. It screamed as it knifed through the upper layers of the Tau world's atmosphere, ancient iron and ceramite tearing the sky open in a lance of fire. Heat washed in burning waves across its scarred hide, turning spikes and chains to lines of dull red. The pod rode a wake of plasma and torn air, trailing a burning wound the length of a continent. Outside, Tau interceptor craft clawed for firing solutions, sleek hulls cutting contrails through the thin air. They spat flak and airburst munitions into the path of the descending coffin. Explosions blossomed like brief, furious suns, shockwaves hammering the pod, slamming it from one side to the other. Inside, 10 giants barely swayed. Warsmith Damakos stood at the center of the cramped interior. Mag-locked boots fused to the deck, one gauntleted hand resting on the haft of his chain axe. The red emergency lumens painted his armor in bloody hues, picking out hazard stripes. Scarred studs and the engraved sigils of the 4th Legion turned renegade. His helm lenses burned a steady amber, scrolling with data. Altitude, velocity, enemy emissions, projected casualty estimates. The numbers climbed, steady and inevitable, hundreds of thousands. Then the neat, rounded comfort of an even million. Damakos watched the runes flicker and settle, and felt the same emotion he always felt at the edge of battle. Nothing at all. Impact in less than 100 heartbeats, said Warpsmith Karzaton over the squad vox. His voice was a metallic rasp, layered with the scratch of Binharik and the faint whispering of far deeper things. Mechadendrites coiled and uncoiled around him, gouging shallow scores in the pod's interior, as if impatient to taste new machines. Tau interceptors continue to engage, Karzaton went on. Aircast pilots shriek coordinates and prayers to their hollow philosophy. It will not save them. Terminator champion Castigar shifted, slightly, the motion making his massive plate growl against the restraints. His armor was a walking bastion, heavy as a fortress gate, its slabs of ceramite etched with chevrons and iron skulls. The thunderhammer at his back vibrated faintly, eager for work. Let them fire, Castigar said. Let them see us coming. Fear must arrive before we do. A low rumble of amusement passed through the Voxnet, harsh and humorless. Havoc Sergeant Vorl hunched over his weapon, thick fingers caressing mag drums of heavy shells. A Reaper launcher hung from his harness by thick cables, each ammunition cylinder marked with kill tallies etched into the brass by a patient knife. He checked, rechecked, then checked again. 300 rounds of high explosive, Vorl muttered. 200 of armor piercers. 6 barrels for the launcher. Grenade stock full. I am content. Your contentment moves me, drawled one of the line brothers. Garion, slaved autocannon cradled in his arms. I feared we would need to ask the Primarch for more. There was a brief crackle as Karzaton rerouted the exterior Auspex feed into their helms. For a heartbeat, the Iron Warriors saw what waited below. A bright blue world, its primary continent girdled in city geometry, neat blocks and grids and sweeping hab sprawls, landing fields, armor parks, firing ranges, defense towers. On the surface, sheets of mobilized firecast units moved with insect precision, rank upon rank of blue armor, neat companies forming and reforming as they prepared for another war in service to their greater good. Their neat world, their careful statistics, their comfort in probabilities. Damakos watched and slowly flexed his hand on the haft of his axe. Their defense grid, he said, more to himself than to his brothers. Primary command nexus located beneath the main sept spire, interfaced to orbital batteries and planetary shields. Once we sever that throat, the body will thrash for a while. Then it will die. And then, asked Castigar. Then the wreck is claimed, Karzaton answered, mechadendrites hissing as they tasted the air. Iron poured into Tau wounds, machine spirits forged from their failed idealism. A new demon forge in honor of Perturabo's hatred. Damakos inclined his head slightly, acknowledged the warpsmith's zeal. This world believes itself a bastion, he said. We will show it what siege truly means. Cripple their grid, break their command, leave their million soldiers blind and directionless. That is the task. No more, no less. Garian's chuckle was bitter iron. 10 against 1,000,000, he said. A fair fight. Generous odds, Vol added. Flak detonated close enough to make the pod ring like a struck bell. Alarms growled in machine voices as one impact sheared a sliver of armor from the outer skin. Gravity slammed them sideways, restraints groaning. The Iron Warriors held their footing. Mark that battery, Damakos said. Marked, Vol replied. I will silence it upon landing. Outside, the clouds thickened into a boiling grey mass, lit from beneath by the glow of the world below. The pod tore a tunnel through the vapor, wrapped in its own burning shroud. Heat haze and turbulence turned the external feed into a seething blur. The scream of atmosphere on Ceramite became a constant shriek. Brace, Karzaton rasped. We make landfall. Retro thrusters fired. The world lurched. For an instant, the 10 Iron Warriors hung between heaven and ground, between purpose and impact. Then, the pod struck. The Tau staging ground was a place of order. Rows of devilfish and hammerhead tanks occupied numbered grid squares. Fire warrior cadres drilled in ranked formations, overseen by crisp-voiced Sha Sui and their attendants. Drones hummed overhead in tidy patterns, relay towers casting clean lines of data across the sky. The drop pod hit at the exact center of that order. It slammed into the ferrocrete with the fury of a falling fortress. The shockwave pulped bodies and snapped vehicle suspensions, flipped grav skimmers and hurled drones from the air. A crater yawned beneath the descending mass, swallowing armor and Tau alike. Alarms screamed in Tau battle cant, neat training mantras shattered by the raw animal noise of sudden catastrophe. For a heartbeat, there was only dust and ringing silence. Then the pod's exterior charges detonated. The petals blew outward in a ring of explosive force, flattened Tau bodies shredded by the blast. Shrapnel scythed through nearby squads, ripping armor, turning limbs to sudden bloody ruin. The crater became a bowl of broken flesh and wrecked machinery. 10 giants strode out of the smoke. Bolters roared, the sound drowning the last echoes of the pod's entry. Mass reactive shells tore into fire warriors still struggling to their feet, bursting chests, snapping spines, pitching bodies, backwards in arcs of dark spray. Drones flared with brief shield blooms and died as sustained fire punished their wavering fields. Castigar moved like a siege tower loosed from its moorings. Each step shook the broken ground. His combi bolter barked in double bursts, one after another, each disciplined volley collapsing a battlesuit or cutting down a Pathfinder's team cowering behind a wrecked hull. When a devilfish, engine shrieking, tried to rise on its grav plates and flee, Castigar's hammer struck its hull with a boom like distant artillery. The skimmer smashed back to earth, buckling in on itself. Vol's launcher chattered as he hosed the flanks of the staging ground. Heavy shells blossomed among fuel dumps and ammo stocks, turning careful Tau logistics into pillars of flame and shrapnel. Fire warriors who had taken cover behind their own vehicles found those same vehicles detonating beneath them. Garion's autocannon roared in slow, deliberate arcs. Each shot a Damakos strode at the point, chain axe. Damakos strode at the point, chain axe chewing the air, bolt pistol barking. A pulse volley slapped across his breastplate, leaving scorched furrows and cracked studs. He turned toward its source, helm lenses narrowing. A Sha Sui stood at the edge of the crater, armor scored, helmet optics bright with fear and stubborn resolve. He shouted an order in battle cant, pulse rifle braced. His squad rallied around him, blue armor marked with sept insignia. Some already bleeding, all aiming. Damakos fired once. The Shasui's helm burst, the body dropping bonelessly. Before the corpse hit the ground, Damakos leapt up out of the crater's lip and into the heart of the squad. His chain axe howled as it bit, not lingering, not relishing, just cutting down obstacles with mechanical certainty. Tau armor gave way, bodies fell. The squad became so much clutter on the field. Across the staging ground, klaxons warbled, orders spooled across comm channels. Gueron Shah, Astartes, impossible, confirm. In the command dome overlooking the fields, the world narrowed to glowing symbols. Within the cool white chamber, beneath a vaulted ceiling of hololithic projectors, Shaso Tashava Kaiserin watched as a single red contact expanded outward. Blue unit icons winked out as it touched them, each accompanied by neat casualty predictions that suddenly became ugly red lines of total loss. Feed integrity? The Shazo asked, voice carefully level. Confirmed, Shazo, a systems officer answered, fingers dancing over a console. Thermal signatures indicate heavy armored infantry. Numbers 10. No additional drops registered. This may be a battlesuit wing or a Gwela super heavy insertion. The Gwela do not fall from orbit in siege coffins, another officer snapped. Those are Gueronsha signatures. Astartes. They were not predicted in this theatre. The Gueronsha are a myth the Imperium uses to frighten its own, said a third too quickly. Our projections show no significant Space Marine presences within this sept. On the main display, the Crimson Cluster pushed deeper into the staging ground, shedding smaller marks that represented destroyed vehicles and shattered cadres. Around it, panicked glyphs flickered and died. The Shazo watched it all, jaw set. One drop pod, he said softly. 10 warriors, and they have already cut the heart from our forward deployment. Recommend Mont Kapatan, the closest aide urged. Strategic killing blow. We can bring 500,000 Firecast assets to bear within a single span. We will smother them in weight of fire. Confirm full numbers available, the Shaso said. A data slate slid into his hand, humming with fresh updates. 1 million. Combat-capable assets on world, the aide said. Firecast, Auxiliary Crute and Vespid, armored divisions, air support. We outnumber them by a factor beyond reason. This will be an instructive engagement, nothing more. The Shazo did not answer immediately. He looked instead at that single red mark and thought about how it did not stutter, did not hesitate. It moved with a straight, murderous certainty that set something primal and unwelcome stirring at the base of his spine. On the torn ground of the staging area, reason was dying in droves. A fire warrior clawed at the churned soil, breath coming in ragged bursts. His leg was ruined, armor torn open by shrapnel, flesh and bone mangled. His pulse rifle lay a few body lengths away, half buried beneath a fallen comrade. He reached for it, fingers scrabbling. A shadow fell over him. He looked up into a helm of iron and hazard stripes, its lenses burning like furnace coals. The giant towering above him ground his boot, down on the fallen rifle, crushing it into the earth. The Tau's breath hitched. He knew the tales, the fragments pulled from Gwela prisoners and battlefield recordings. Gueron Shah, Emperor's angels turned monsters. He had never expected to see one at this range and still be alive. Do not kill me, he managed, low Gothic thick on his Tau tongue. Release me. For the greater good, there is no purpose in this slaughter. The Iron Warrior tilted his head, as if examining some unfamiliar but uninteresting tool. The greater good, Damakos said, switching his vox to ride the open Tau channel. His words went out across every local comm unit that Karzaton's scrap code had infested, seeping into helmet speakers and vehicle cogitators. A pleasant phrase. It tastes like denial. He bent, catching the wounded fire warrior by the gorget and lifting him effortlessly from the ground. The Tau's ruined leg dangled, scraping trails in the dirt. The Iron Warrior turned slowly, presenting the struggling captive as bait to the battlefield. In the lee of a half-toppled devilfish, a cluster of fire warriors saw their comrade hanging in the air. Instinct and training overrode sense. They moved, darting from cover, rifles raised, trying to form a protective screen as they pushed toward him. Vol's launcher coughed. The shells landed not among the rescuers, but behind them, bursting in a tight pattern that collapsed their chosen cover and funneled them exactly where the Iron Warriors had predicted. Garion's autocannon picked up the rhythm, its roaring bursts cutting down those who tried to fall back. The survivors were driven forward, straight into the overlapping sights of 3 bolters. The air filled with the bark of mass reactive rounds, and the would-be rescuers fell in shredded heaps. Damakos watched them die, then turned his helm back to the fire warrior in his grip. "Your purpose," he said, "was to die here, to teach your comrades that numbers cannot save them, that courage cannot save them, that their ideals cannot change the simple truth of iron and range." The fire warrior tried to speak, mouth working, blood flecking his helm grill. Damakos twisted his wrist. Armor cracked. The Tau went limp. He let the corpse drop like discarded ballast and turned away, already done with it. His Vox clicked back to his brothers, ice hard once more. "Warpsmith, their machine grid." "Already in hand," Karzaton said. The Warpsmith stood at the base of a shattered defense turret, mechadendrites thrust deep into the ruptured housing of its systems. Tau glyphs crawled across glassy screens, then warped, dissolving into angular sigils of iron and rust. Tiny sparks of sickly light flickered in the depths of the turret's spirit as something other answered Karzaton's call. Across the staging ground, drones froze mid-flight. Their optics burned a momentary hellish red before swiveling in unison toward Tau positions. Burst cannons chattered, tearing through their former allies with perfect, remorseless aim. Communications nodes spasmed. Data streams became howls of static and whispered Binharic curses. The clean hum of Tau infrastructure choked as corrupted instructions flooded their cores. "They build on sand and call it foundation," Karzaton murmured. "We build on hatred. It endures." Far above, in the command dome, the hololithic display changed. Around the central red mark, blue formations that had been moving to encircle and contain now flickered in disarray. Drones turned on their owners, defensive turrets went silent or began firing at random. Data feeds became chaotic. "Machine corruption," an officer gasped. "How? Their tech base is primitive compared to—" "Do not underestimate the servants of the warp," the Chasseur snapped. "Zoom out, I want full theater." Obedient glyphs danced. The view pulled back, showing the full sprawl of the Bay primary sept city, a continent of metal and orderly hab blocks, firing ranges and armor parks, glideways and grav towers. Beyond it, orbital paths traced in calm arcs, defense satellites and station platforms linked into grids of reassuring geometry. Overlaid upon it all, a new layer formed. Mobilizing cadres marched toward the impact zone in long, sweeping arrows of blue. Battlesuit formations assembled in vast staging areas. Manta dropships rose from armored bunkers, their icons marked for heavy bombardment runs. Auxiliary Kroot and Vespid swarms moved at the edges like a ragged, hungry halo. The tally crawled down one side of the projection. Fire warriors, battlesuits, armor, air support, auxiliary packs, 1 million soldiers. The Chasseur felt every digit like a weight in his chest and clung to the comfort of it. "Deploy Montka," he said. "The killing blow. We will not permit this infection to spread." "Yes, Chasseur." The aides moved at once, voices rising, as they relayed orders. All available Firecast assets converging, armor divisions rerouting, battlesuit contingents pivoting to new coordinates, Aircast committing full support. On the torn earth below, Damakos stood atop the broken steps of what had been the staging ground's command bunker. Its smooth white walls were cracked and stained now, peppered with impact scars, Tau blood drying in dark streaks. Pathfinders lay where they had fallen in the corridors within, their stealth fields burned out by explosions and close-range bolter fire. Shield drones were smashed against bulkheads, their emitter arrays torn free and repurposed as makeshift reinforcement plates over hastily widened firing slits. Behind Damakos, Iron Warriors moved with the ruthless efficiency of a siege crew. They tore down Tau iconography and replaced it with crude iron sigils. They dragged wrecked tanks into position as armored bulwarks, fused them into place with melter bursts and bolter fire. They seeded the approaches with mines made from Tau ordnance and Iron Warrior ingenuity. A fortress was being born from the corpse of the Tau position. Defense lines established, Vol reported, his voice as dry as ash. Fields of fire interlocking, approaches mined, ammunition caches secured. Machine spirits suitably motivated, Karzaton added. Damakos looked out across the staging grounds toward the horizon. In the distance, even through the smoke, he could see the first hints of movement, a darkening line on the far edge of the world, dust thrown up by armored columns, atmospheric craft cutting contrails, the promise of an oncoming tide. Then we will hold, he said. They will come with their million. We will teach them what that number truly means. In the command dome, the Chasseur watched the red icon settle like a rusted nail in the center of his maps. Around it, blue arrows curved inward in great sweeping motions, a perfect act of encirclement, scripted and executed by doctrine. Begin the Montka, he ordered quietly. Across the world, the greater good marched to war against 10 warriors of iron. Dawn came as a dim smear of light through smoke and dust, where a crisp Tau staging field had stood the previous cycle. A new shape hunched against the horizon. The clean lines of the command bunker were gone, swallowed by layers of broken armor, torn ferrocrete, and wrecked vehicles welded into ugly ramparts. The smooth approach avenues had become jagged trenches and overlapping kill lanes. Every straight line had been broken, every angle bent to iron purpose. The Iron Warriors had worked through the dark hours like ants hollowing a carcass. Mine belts lay invisible beneath slurries of ash and churned earth, seeded with Tau submunitions wired together by crude cabling and chains. Marker poles, once neat Tau navigational aids, now disguised trip charges and Prometheum tanks. Deadfire warriors, Kroot and drones were, and, stacked in filthy berms, armor and bodies fused into bulwarks with weld lines of bolter fire. Devilfish hulls were sunk into the ground as static pillboxes, their ruined engines shackled to new gun mountings. Railgun turrets, torn from shattered hammerheads, had been emplaced in recesses the Tau had never designed, their barrels aimed now at the advance routes they had once guarded. Inside the captured bunker, Havoc Sergeant Vol stood before a wall of flickering hollow slates, his armored finger tracing firing arcs in the air. The screens showed the world beyond his concrete cocoon in pale ghost hues. Columns of fire warriors advancing in perfect skirmish lines, drones hovering at prescribed intervals. Armor grinding steadily forward along pre-planned paths. Tau discipline rendered as numbers and trajectories. Vol cared nothing for their idealism. He saw only distances, calibers, and time. Battery 1. Adjust elevation by 3 degrees downward, he voxed, his voice a rasp. Of iron over the squad net. Let them close. We want detonation in their second rank, not the first. Slaved railgun turrets hummed as their corrupted machine spirits obeyed, guided now by Iron Warrior telemetry instead of Earthcast algorithms. Data from Karzaton's hacked drones fed directly into the firing cogitators, overwriting Tau safety protocols with brutal efficiency. Macro cannon ready, reported a mortal bondsman somewhere deeper in the bunker, voice thin and reedy over the vox. The man had been a slave of the Grand Company for longer than he could remember. Now he huddled at the base of a makeshift artillery piece cobbled together from Tau construction machinery and repurposed launch racks, its improvised barrel aimed skyward. Charge building. Machine spirit is agitated. It will fire when I tell it to, Vol said. Not before, not after. Above, On the outer ramparts that had once been a perimeter promenade for neat Tau patrols, Damakos watched the enemy gather through the cobwebbed lens of a captured scope. He stood atop a berm of fused armor and corpses, boots sunk in Tau blood gone black in the cool air. His chain axe rested mag-clamped at his hip, bolt pistol holstered for now. The horizon was moving. Dust plumes rose in long, snaking lines. The glint of armor caught the dim light. Firecast formations advanced in layered waves, tens of thousands of warriors in blue plate, arrayed with the clinical precision of a species that believed war could be reduced to doctrine and geometry. Drones buzzed above their heads in careful patterns, shield emitters glowing faintly. Behind the infantry, devilfish transports and hammerhead tanks rolled in orderly ranks, flanked by skimmer teams and flares of battlesuit jets. Overhead, dark shapes of aircraft circled and repositioned in response to terse commands. All that order, all that faith. 1,000,000 soldiers, Damakos murmured over the command channel. Yet they come at us like a parade. They believe in their numbers. Then we shall educate them, Castigar answered from the eastern wall, his voice a crack of stone breaking. Lesson 1. Numbers burn. Karzaton's voice filtered through next, overlaid with the whisper of Binharik and the faint, fretful static of machine spirits in revolt. All artillery systems report eager, the warpsmith crooned. Rail batteries slaved, macro cannon primed, even their construction engines whine for release. Damakos lowered the scope. Vol, he said, begin. The Havoc sergeant needed no more. In the bunker command room, he raised one hand, fingers flexing in a precise, measured rhythm. The wall slates responded, firing solutions snapping into place. Target designations shifted from neutral to hostile, then to doomed. Voral's Vox clicked. Fire. Captured railguns spoke with thunder, their shots lanced out from repurposed emplacements, strobing the air with white. Lances of compressed energy. Tau armor in the leading ranks vanished in sudden eruptions of light and torn metal. Tanks that had been grinding forward at battle speed became towers of flame and shrapnel. Their crews erased before they knew they had been targeted. The macro cannon boomed, a grinding roar that shook dust from the bunker ceiling. A shell the size of a battlesuit bellowed forth, trailing smoke. It arced high over the battlefield, then plunged into the center of a fire warrior column. For an instant there was only impact. Then the world around that point blurred as shockwaves picked up bodies and armor and hurled them outward in pieces. Invisible mine belts triggered in staggered waves, carefully timed by cheap and faithless Vox relays. Prometheum bombs buried in the earth erupted in tall sheets of burning fuel, cutting off avenues of retreat. Submunitions ripped through drone screens and flayed exposed infantry. Smoke generators ignited, but it was the wrong sort of smoke, thick and cloying, laced with fine metallic dust that played havoc with Tau optics. The first wave of the firecast hit that unseen wall and came apart. From the ramparts, Iron Warrior bolters joined the storm, heavy weapons tracked with machine precision, shells slamming into the disrupted formations. Grenade launchers thunked, their rounds bursting in the pockets where the Fire Warriors had clustered under their own doctrine. What had been neat advance lines turned in a heartbeat into a churning mass of bodies and wreckage, the disciplined march degenerating under the sheer violence of the trap. In the midst of it, Tau officers shouted over the din, reciting battlefield axioms, invoking the greater good as they tried to restore order. Hold lines. Advance by fire team. The enemy seeks to disrupt cohesion. Remember your training. The greater good is served by calm minds and steady hands. This is a guerrilla assault, not a catastrophe. One officer stood atop a half-wrecked devilfish, armor scorched, marker light in hand. He painted likely Iron Warrior nests, with steady, disciplined sweeps, his voice a constant mantra to his troops. This is Montka, he insisted. The killing blow is ours. We were trained for this. For the greater good, we will not falter. A long burst from Vorl's launcher turned the vehicle beneath him into a blossoming flower of fire and metal. The officer vanished with it, his mantras cut off mid-pledge. Further along the line, a Pathfinder team crawled between craters, stealth fields flickering as they sought vantage points. They marked firing slits and suspected artillery locations with hard, disciplined efficiency, their marker lights puncturing smoke and haze. On a distant rise, hammerheads responded, their railguns discharging in almost elegant arcs. The captured rail positions where Iron Warriors had taken cover exploded in showers of pulverized stone and scorched armor. A Skyray spat seeker missiles that hunted along the painted paths with frightening intelligence, slamming into bunker mouths and makeshift pillboxes. Crisis teams descended in bursts of bright white exhaust, their jets flaring as they dropped into hard cover. They advanced in Kaoyun pattern, the patient hunt, surging out to fire concentrated volleys before falling back to new positions, probing and testing for weakness. Their pilots kept their voices level, even as the battlefield around them became a charnel plain. Contact with Gueronsha fortification confirmed, one crisis team leader reported. Enemy fire patterns show overlapped sectors and deep entrenchment. Casualty projections within acceptable parameters. Maintain Kaoyun, find the gap, exploit. On the ramparts, Damakos listened to their clipped confidence bleed through the corrupted comm feeds and allowed himself the smallest curve of disdain in his voice. They still believe this is a problem of numbers, he said. They search for a gap, as if war is a puzzle waiting to be solved. Let them search, Castigar replied. They will find only iron. Another wave of fire warriors charged, this one under the cover of thick smoke laid by drone dispensers, marker lights cutting thin spears of brightness through the murk. They chanted the greater good as they came, a disciplined roar that tried to drown the sound of guns. Underneath, the minefields listened only to their own equations. Explosions rolled through the haze, shredding formations, flinging bodies and debris skyward. Autocannons and heavy bolters roared from concealed nests, muzzles wreathed in their own colored fire. The smoke lit from within with stuttering flashes, silhouettes jerking and falling as the Iron Warriors applied their craft. In the midst of the carnage, a deeper tremor shook the outer defenses. Warning runes spiked across every Iron Warrior helm. Castigar, Karzaton voxed, for once sounding almost amused. The Tau have sent us a toy. Out beyond the mine belts, something vast moved through the smoke. It strode on reverse-jointed legs, its mass held aloft by humming technology, its battlesuit hull bristling with guns and shield emitters. A riptide suit, taller than any normal battlesuit, stepped through the ruin of its own infantry support, shield shimmering as small arms fire and falling debris broke harmlessly against it. Smaller escorts flanked it, regular battlesuits that darted and fired, their jets flaring. The riptide leveled its heavy weapon, the air whining as energy built. Breach imminent at western quadrant, Vorl snarled. That thing will punch a hole wide enough for a company. No, Damakos said. It will not. Castigar's growl was pure satisfaction. Permission to engage. Granted, Damakos replied. Make an example. A column of pale light flared atop the nearest rampart as Castigar's teleport beacon activated. For a heartbeat, he was a pillar of shimmering distortion. Then he was not there at all. He reappeared in an explosion of displaced air at the base of the Riptide's hull. The giant battlesuit's pilot had a momentary flicker of warning across his sensors, an anomalous thermal spike within the supposed safe zone of his own shield perimeter. Before he could react, Castigar's Stormbolter opened up at point-blank range, shells hammering into the Riptide's leg joints and sensor clusters. Ceramite boots dug into the dirt as the Terminator champion leaned into the recoil, walking his fire up the suit's flanks. The Riptide's shield flared, struggling to redistribute the sudden onslaught, but Karzaton had already laced the emplaced railguns with his whispering scrap code. At his command, they pivoted as one, barrels tracking with unnatural speed, locking onto the brief window of vulnerability Castigar had opened. "Fire," the warpsmith whispered. Twin lances of compressed energy slammed into the Riptide's shield from either flank. Overcharged capacitors screamed, then burst. The shield collapsed in a spray of wild light, leaving the battlesuit naked. Castigar surged forward, chain fist roaring as power fields crackled along its blades. He drove the whirring weapon into the Riptide's thigh, tearing through armor that had been designed to withstand almost anything. The suit shuddered as its support gave way, its mass listing. Inside the command cockpit, the Tau pilot screamed defiance and slammed every available system into emergency override. Heat warnings filled his vision. Structural alerts blared. He tried to pivot, to bring his heavy gun to bear on the Terminator, tearing his machine apart. Castigar wrenched his chain fist upward, carving a brutal wound through armor, cabling, and support struts. The Riptide toppled sideways, its escort battlesuits scattering. The gigantic hull hit the ground with earth-shaking force. The pilot never had a chance to finish his last invocation to the greater good. Castigar's hammer came down once, like the fall of a siege ram on a crumbling gate. The suit's core went dark. All across the battlefield, Tau comms surged with shocked exclamations. "Their elite falls," Damakos intoned over the hacked channels, his voice cold as void. "Your towering hope dragged into the dust. This is the fate of all your careful projections." He let his words ride the static, threaded through Karzaton's scrap code so they bled into every channel. "Casualty count in your first assault wave exceeds 100,000 dead and broken," he continued, each syllable measured and precise. "Your projections expected a fraction of that. Adjust your models, revise your curves, see how little it changes the outcome." Inside the command dome, the Chasseur stood rigid as his officers relayed the numbers. Disbelief warred with drilled calm on their faces. Markerlite efficiency reduced to unacceptable levels. 1. Assault are extreme. Extreme! The assault are extreme. Extreme, the Chasseur repeated. He watched the bar representing losses climb, steady and pitiless. It approached ranges that doctrine described only in hypothetical exercises, in horror stories told to fresh recruits to emphasize the importance of proper planning. Overhead, the aircast finally committed in earnest. Manta gunships swept in low, their silhouettes blotting out the smoke-streaked sky. Barracuda fighters knifed through the murk, engines howling. Bomb bays opened. Smart munitions dropped in glittering strings. The makeshift fortress shuddered under the rain of fire. Sections of the outer ramparts vanished in fountains of debris. Mortar pits and heavy weapon nests were simply gone, their crews hurled aside like broken dolls. A devilfish pillbox that had spat bolter rounds all through the early hours took a direct hit, the transport hull rupturing in a blast that sent twisted metal cartwheeling across the battlefield. On one shattered section of wall, Brother Sestian found himself suddenly alone. The bombardment had chewed the rampart out from under him, leaving him half buried in cracked stone and twisted armor plating. His armor was split at the torso, warning runes screaming in his helm. One arm hung numb at his side, but the other still gripped the handles of a heavy bolter. Through the settling dust, he saw fire warriors advancing, armor scorched and dented, but spirits rising as they saw the wounded breach. They charged, pulse rifles spitting. Sestian braced the heavy bolter one-handed against the rubble, pinning his lower body, and squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked like an angry beast. Shells tore into the oncoming cadre, ripping through armor, bouncing bodies against one another. The first rank fell, the second stumbled over them. More came on, urged forward by shouted invocations of the greater good, by the sheer momentum of their massed assault. Sestian kept firing. Warning sigils for overheating and ammunition depletion fought for space in his vision. A pulse round glanced from his helm, cracking one lens. Another punched into his exposed torso, drilling through ceramite and scoring his fused ribs. He snarled, the sound static masked, and held the trigger down. When at last the heavy bolter clicked on an empty feed, the breach before him, was a tangled heap of blue armor and still forms. Sestian tried to draw breath for one more curse, one more mocking promise to any Tau still alive to hear it. The rubble shifted. Something in his cracked breastplate gave way. Darkness, heavy and absolute, closed over him like soil on a grave. On the command channels, Damakos registered the loss as a flicker in the squad rooms. One Iron Warrior gone, others marked in amber, wounded but functional. Armor spirits howled in pain, flesh ached, systems overloaded, and cut back in. Across the field, Tau runes representing dead and routed units had climbed into the hundreds of thousands. They call this extreme, Damakos murmured. They do not yet understand the word. He stood once more in the bunker's heart, before a hololithic map that had once displayed neat grids and reassuring overlays for Tau officers. Karzaton's corruption had twisted the display, but its information was still clear enough. Blue markers indicated the mass of Tau forces still converging. New lines traced their latest plan. They were forming circles now. The Montka doctrine had failed to deliver the swift killing blow. Now cautious minds reached for the Kauyon at scale. Encirclement. Multiple siege lines radiating outward from the captured bunker. Layered fortifications, armor and infantry and air support all reorganized into a tightening ring of steel and plasma. A noose intended to strangle the Iron Warriors where they stood. Voral regarded the ghostly ring with an appraising grunt. They learn, he said, slowly. They try, Karzaton added, mechadendrites twitching in amusement. They build a wall around us and think it means safety. Damakos studied the projection in silence for a few long breaths. The hololith cast pale light across the iron of his helm, picking out the scars and rune work. Outside, the distant thunder of guns continued, punctuated by the occasional deeper roar of some collapsing structure. Let them build, he said at last. Let them draw their lines and dig their trenches. Let them believe the siege belongs to them. He lifted one gauntleted hand, tracing the shape of the encirclement in the air, as if following the outline of a familiar sigil. The more complete their ring, the more perfect the pattern of their death, he went on. A broken wall leaks defenders, a closed wall traps them. We will kill them more efficiently this way. He closed his fist. A million Tau soldiers continued to march. A million Tau soldiers continued to march, unknowingly tightening their own noose under the unblinking gaze of 10 warriors of iron. Dawn crawled over a battlefield made of ash. The sky was a low bruised smear, choked with the smoke of burned promethium and the fine dust of pulverized ferrocrete. Where once a neat Tau staging field had spread in clean lines, there was now a ring of their own making, firing platforms in concentric tiers, shield generators humming behind angular barricades, artillery nests dug deep into the broken ground. A dozen defensive lines circled the Iron Warrior bastion, each one a neat curve of blue and white geometry, like ripples around a stone. The stone at the center was made of corpses and rusted iron. From the ramparts of that ugly fortress, Warsmith Damakos watched the encirclement with the patient attention of a craftsman studying a half-finished engine. Tau fortifications bristled outward, cannons and missile racks tracking, shield domes flickering. Supply trains moved along hastily laid lines, drones flitting between positions in fluttering constellations. Fire warrior trenches cut lines of dark scars in the earth. They had built a siege around him. They did not understand that by doing so, they had made themselves the besieged. Outer ring complete, came Vorl's voice over the vox, dry as pulverized stone. Additional artillery emplacements identified at the northern quadrant, railgun clusters, pulse mortar nests, shield saturation approaching limits we can reliably punch through with the captured batteries. Damakos lowered the cracked lens of his scope. They bury themselves, he said. They pace their own cell with every firing platform they raise. Castigar stood a short distance away, armor blackened and scarred. hazard stripes dulled by powder. He leaned against a section of rampart that had once been the overturned hull of a devilfish, now fused into place with welded beams of Tau armor and rusted girders. His hammer rested head down beside him, its head still faintly humming with caged force. "They would call this safety," the Terminator champion rumbled. "Walls between them and us. Distance, firepower, all their favorite illusions." "They will test those illusions," DeMarco said. Again and again. The first shells of the new day whined overhead, bright lines of fire cutting the dirty air. Tau artillery began to speak in earnest, rail rounds slamming into the bastion's outer works. Whole sections of corpse berms and armor revetments vanished in showers of debris. Shield plates scavenged from Tau vehicles shattered, their fields shorting out in blue-white flares. The bastion groaned but held. Then the infantry came. Fire warriors rose from their trenches in ordered lines, armor marked in, sept colors dulled by ash. They advanced at a steady pace, rifles held just so, drones hovering overhead in practiced patterns. Kroot loped between the formations, lean shapes hunkered low, their eyes fixed on the promise of meat. Vespid swarms buzzed in ragged clouds above, wings beating at the foul air. Battlesuits strode in support, jets flaring, weapons already hot. The first wave hit the mine belts that the Tau themselves had unknowingly walked around for cycles. Charges buried deep beneath the churned earth responded to careful trigger codes and calculated delays. Explosions rolled across the advancing lines in staggered waves, ripping open paths in the ranks, flinging bodies high. Fire warriors vanished in flashes of light and dust. Kroot were thrown aside, their lean frames snapping under the concussive force. Drones spun madly, optics blown out. Before the survivors could recover, iron warrior guns opened up. Heavy bolters barked from hidden nests, their staccato thunder, turning the gaps into killing funnels. Autocannons laid drumming lines across the flanks of the advancing cadres. Grenade launchers lobbed timed charges into the pockets where training had driven the Tau to cluster. Armor moved up to support, devilfish and hammerheads grinding over the bodies of their own fallen. Captured railguns within the bastion shuddered as Vor fed them firing solutions. Their beams lanced out, punching through the lighter skimmers, turning turret rings and reactor cores into ruptured fireworks. The first assault wave died in a storm of iron and fire. The second came on its heels, as doctrine demanded. Kroot packs hurled themselves at the bastion walls, claws scrabbling for purchase. They were met with disciplined volleys and controlled bursts of promethium that turned their charge into screaming silhouettes. Vespid dove, trying to crack open gun nests with sudden, precise blasts. Castigar swatted them from the air with his stormbolter, shells bursting. Among their ranks, Wings and chitin whirling away in broken spirals. Battlesuits pushed forward through the carnage, jets burning bright, weapons spitting shards of plasma and torrents of missile fire. They found no single clean angle of approach. Every time they thought they had pinned down a firing position, it shifted, revealing itself to be one node in a deeper pattern. Iron warriors yielded ground only meter by meter, never without having already calculated the damage the advance would cost their enemy. Wave after wave broke. The ground between the Tau lines and the bastion became a carpet of bodies and shattered machinery. Smoke thickened until the air tasted of char and metal, until even Tau optics began to falter. Still they came. On the third major push of the day, focused railgun fire found a flaw. A section of the western rampart, already pitted by earlier bombardments, shuddered as 3 heavy rounds struck in quick succession. The first cracked the supporting structures beneath the fused hulls. The second sheared through the improvised gun nests above. The third punched deep, detonating old munitions left buried in the ferrocrete. The wall section collapsed. Smoke and dust gouted up from the fresh breach. Through it, fire warriors surged, supported by crisis suits that had been waiting for precisely such an opening, ready to exploit any gleaned weakness. Garyon was there to meet them. The Iron Warrior stood in the center of the gap, braced amid the rubble, Reaper autocannon resting in the crook of his armored elbow. His armor was already scored by a night and day of attrition, hazard stripes dulled by ash. His helm lenses burned a deep, fierce red. He triggered the autocannon. The weapon's deep, chugging roar filled the breach. Shells tore through the advancing crisis suits, cracking their armor, sending them stumbling back. Fire warriors behind them were shredded in the storm, their neat lines vanishing in sudden sprays detonated around him, showering him with shards of concrete and metal. A rail round clipped his pauldron, spinning him half around and tearing the shoulder plate away in a fountain of sparks. Garyon steadied, boots grinding into the rubble, and kept firing. He voxed nothing. There were no oaths, no grand declarations, only the steady application of iron. At last, the weight of fire told. His breastplate split under a concentrated volley. Warning runes blazed in his helm, then winked out one by one. The autocannon's roar faltered. He did not fall. His free hand moved instead to his belt, fingers closing around the cluster of crack charges hanging there. He tore the bundle free and hurled it into the mass of advancing armor at the breach's rear, where devilfish transports and a hammerhead pushed forward to support the infantry. The charges detonated in a chained roar, collapsing a half-ruined gantry that had once held Tau sensor arrays. The towering structure, weakened by earlier shelling, gave way and came crashing down in a cascade of steel and dust. It hammered into the heart of the armored spearhead, crushing hulls, snapping rails, blocking the breach with twisted wreckage. Only then did Garyon finally slump forward, his lifeless bulk collapsing amidst the rubble he had defended. The breach had become a clogged, smoking wound instead of a clear path. "Garyon is gone," Vor reported over the Vox, voice tight but controlled. "I mark his expenditure," Damakos answered, watching the frantic Tau efforts to clear the newly blocked opening. "He bought us time at the cost of one brother and one ammunition feed. Acceptable trade." Between the assaults, in the breathing spaces filled only by the groan of shifting wreckage and the distant mutter of Tau artillery, Khazad-dûm prowled the ramparts. The Warpsmith's mechadendrites dripped oil and blood in equal measure. He moved from weapon to weapon, muttering in Binharic, and growled low Gothic, daubing crude sigils on Tau armor, plating with a mixture of machine fluid and Xenos gore. His fingers traced runes into steel, each stroke deliberate, each curve a binding. Gun barrels that had been merely tools of war before began to thrum with something more. Bolt weapons growled as if eager. Captured railguns shivered, field coils humming in anticipation. Even the improvised macro cannon pulsed with a sickly rhythm, as though something caged within its workings now strained at its bonds. Small warp entities, coaxed from the edges of reality by Khazad-dûm's invocations, nestled in machine spirits like parasites. Their whispers bled into firing cogitators, urging them toward violence. The fortress became a living engine of siege, its every component linked by a web of iron will and hungry ghosts. "You bind filth into our guns," Castigar said as the Warpsmith finished another rite, smearing a final glyph onto a rail turret. "I bind purpose," Khazad-dûm replied. "Hatred is a more reliable fuel than faith. Listen." They did. For a moment, between the distant thunder of Tau batteries and the crackle of fires, they could hear it. A low, simmering vibration in the ramparts beneath their boots, as if the fortress itself was grinding its teeth. Outside the ring of iron, Tau desperation grew. In the command dome, Shasso Tashavar Kaisrin listened to casualty reports delivered in voices that worked hard not to shake. Assault after assault dashed itself against the bastion and fell away, leaving only thicker carpets of dead. The neat curves of his siege lines were now scarred by blackened gaps where units had simply ceased to exist. "The encirclement holds," an aide insisted. "Our lines are intact. We will wear them down. No force can stand against this many guns for long." The Chasseurs looked at the projection. A single malignant knot of hostility glowed at the center, unchanged. Around it, his forces grew numerically weaker with every engagement. Long, he repeated. They have already stood longer than any sane projection allowed. They have overturned our mathematics. He bowed his head for a heartbeat, then straightened. Authorize deep strike insertion, he said. Crisis teams, enforcer cadres, any elite assets still combat capable. We will strike directly into their heart. We cut the head from the iron beast. Ethereal advisors exchanged glances, eyes dark with concern, but said nothing. Their silence was its own kind of assent. Moments later, the bastion trembled with a new kind of impact. Warning runes flared across Iron Warrior helms as Tau teleportation signatures and grav insertions registered inside their perimeter. Beams of pale light speared into courtyards and corridors, resolving into crisis suits and hazard-armored enforcers, who opened fire the instant they materialized. Bulkhead doors blew inward as grav pods punched through weakened sections of the roof, disgorging fire teams into the smoke-choked interior. The corridors became warrens of close-range brutality. Pulse fire lit the darkness in strobing flashes. Sparks cascaded from shattered conduits. Air filled with the stink of ionized metal and burned flesh. At these ranges, there was no room for careful arcs and measured trajectories. Chain axes met carapace. Power fists crushed battlesuit frames. The disciplined bursts of Tau rifles became panicked, point-blank shots. Damakos met one deep strike team at a junction marked by hanging cables and dripping coolant. The first crisis suit to round the corner loosed a reflexive volley, bolts of energy slamming into his chestplate. Armor buckled and cracked, but he was already moving, Chainax howling alive as he slammed into the battlesuit. Teeth of tempered steel bit into composite armor, chewing deep. The Tau pilot's panicked cries filled the shared channel before cutting off in a crackle of static. Behind the fallen suit, more Tau pushed forward, an enforcer team in heavy plate barking orders. Damakos moved with cold precision, every strike of his axe measured, every shot from his bolt pistol a calculated kill. Bodies and wreckage piled in the narrow space. Elsewhere, Brother Lorcian stood in the central courtyard, armor scarred, plasma gun humming in his hands. Teleportation energies flared around him as a cluster of crisis suits dropped into the open space, jets firing as they stabilized, missile pods swiveling. They locked onto the Iron Warrior. Target priority 1. One pilot voxed, voice cool. Gueronsha heavy weapon. Eliminate. Lorcian smiled inside his helm, a thin, joyless twist. At last, he murmured. He thumbed his plasma gun's charge selector past the sane limits. Warning chimes screamed in his ears. Heat wash rolled up his arm, across, his chest. Coolant systems howled and failed. The cannon in his hands became a star trying to be born. He held it steady and walked forward into the midst of the descending suits. He fired. For a heartbeat, the world turned white. A miniature sun flared in the courtyard, devouring air, stone, metal, flesh without distinction. Crisis suits nearest the blast simply ceased to exist, their frames vaporized. Those further out were hurled aside like toys, armor slagged, systems fried. The courtyard floor cracked and glazed under the heat. When the light died, nothing remained of Lorcian but scorched ceramite fragments fused into the newly made crater. His name rune on Damakos' helm went dark. The deep strike assault faltered in the face of such blunt, suicidal ferocity. Isolated teams found themselves cut off, converging Iron Warriors tearing them apart in brutal counterattacks. Within the smoke-filled corridors, the last surviving Tau elite died hard, pulse rifles thudding, uselessly against ceramite as chain blades and power weapons answered with finality. At length, the bastion fell still again. It was a ruin now, even more than before. Whole sections had been chewed out by bombardment and fighting. Courtyards were cracked and cratered. Corridors were clogged with bodies, ash and rubble. Ammo reserves lay noticeably lower. Armor runes on Damakos' display glowed amber and red for more than one brother. In the bunker's innermost chamber, lit by the half-ruined glow of a damaged hololith. Damakos kept his ledger. He stood before the map, helm off, scarred features etched in the flickering light. In one hand, he held a slate covered, not in Tau glyphs, but in neat columns of his own making. Ammunition counts, artillery barrels remaining functional, minefield coverage, enemy formations destroyed, estimated dead, brothers fallen, Cestian crushed beneath his own rampart, Garion in the breach, Laucian in the courtyard star. Each name was a line, a cost weighed against effect. He felt no grief, only the rhythm of expenditure. 1 million assets at the start, he said softly, more to himself than to the others in the room. Hundreds of thousands now corpses or wreckage. 3 brothers spent to purchase this butcher's ledger. The ratios are satisfactory. Castigar stood nearby, helm still on, watching the hololith's shifting blue. Karzaton hunched over a damaged cogitator bank. Mechadendrites plunged into its guts as he coaxed still more data from the Tau machine. Ratios, Castigar repeated. You speak of them as if they matter. They do, Damakos replied. They are the shape of this victory. The beauty of it is in the mathematics. 1 million dead, not because they were destined to die, but because their deaths can fit into columns and lines, because we made them efficient. Efficient, Vorl echoed. We are running low on shells. That, more than the damage to the bastion, more than the scars on his own plate, drew Damakos's full attention. He looked at the hololith, at the ring of Tau forces around his position, at the way their siege lines had thickened even as they bled, at the way their artillery nests multiplied, at the distances to the distant city sprawl where he knew, with the certainty of an experienced besieger, that ethereal castes and sector command would be hiding. If we remain, he said, the next cycle will be more of the same. They will tighten the ring. They will pile more guns. We will kill them. They will kill us. Slowly. Eventually, there will be too little iron left to answer their numbers. Then we do not remain, Castigar said. Damakos nodded. We invert the siege once more, he said. We take the fight from this grave we have dug and carry it to their heart. We break their command, their ethereal, their morale. Without that spine, the body will collapse, no matter how many limbs it still possesses. Karzaton withdrew his mechadendrites from the cogitator, sparks crackling around his armored form. I can give you a path, the warpsmith said. Maintenance tunnels beneath their siege works, power conduits and service shafts that lead toward the main city's underworks. It will be crawling with vermin and Tau stingwings, but it will bypass their outer rings. Good, Damakos said. We will not sit here and be worn away. We will cut forward. He turned back to the hololith and with a flick of his wrist highlighted the nearest magazine cluster feeding the bastion's remaining guns. We light this place as our signal, he added. We will turn their siege lines into a funeral pyre. The munitions dump lay beneath what had once been the main staging platform. It had grown bloated over the hours with captured Tau ordnance and Iron Warrior reserves, a cavern of stacked shells, fuel cells, and ammo crates. Bondsmen and servitors had come and gone, ferrying supplies, upward. Now Damakos ordered them clear. He and Karzaton walked among the stacks, placing charges, adjusting timers, whispering to machine spirits and the things hidden within the walls. They moved with the assurance of men who knew exactly how much force was needed to tear open sky and earth. When they emerged once more onto the shattered surface, the Tau were already preparing yet another assault. Rail rounds continued to thud into the bastion. New trenches had been dug, new shield lines raised. Damakos stood on the highest surviving parapet, helm under one arm, and looked out over the enemy. To all Tau listening, he voxed on the open channels Karzaton still held in his clawed grasp. You have spent a great deal of lives trying to bury us. We are ungrateful guests. We decline to remain interred. He replaced his helm and looked to his brothers, what remained of them. Castigar, scarred but massive. Vorl, gunslinger of cold precision. Karzaton, wreathed in mechanical, limbs and faint warp light. Dreven and Scallion and the few others still standing, armor cracked, lenses bright. "On my mark," he said. Deep beneath the bastion, the first charge went off. The munitions dump did not explode so much as detonate reality in its vicinity. The ground convulsed. The bastion's central structures erupted in a column of fire and shrapnel that punched through the hanging smoke like a spear. Shockwaves blasted outward, ripping through the nearest Tau siege lines, flipping tanks, collapsing trenchworks, turning firing platforms into tumbling wreckage. Sections of the encircling wall of steel simply ceased to exist. Fire warriors were hurled screaming into the air. Drones were shredded. Artillery pieces toppled like toys. Within that manufactured chaos, iron moved. The surviving Iron Warriors charged out of the collapsing fortress, riding the blast wave like the jagged teeth of a shell. They came through smoke and flame, weapons barking, armor streaked with fresh soot and the blood of the morning's work. Tau, who had been facing inward toward the bastion, now found the enemy suddenly among them, closer than any of their careful projections had allowed. Fire teams broke under the shock as chain axes and storm bolters tore into their flanks. Damakos led from the front, chain axe whining a hungry note. Castigar's hammer rose and fell like a siege ram, each impact clearing space. Vorl walked his fire through stunned squads, cutting them down before they could properly raise their rifles. Karzaton's mechadendrites spat sparks and corrupted code into nearby gun emplacements, turning them on their own lines. Behind them, their own bastion burned like a funeral pyre, collapsing into the crater left by the detonated munitions. Ahead, beyond the staggered remnants of the shattered siege, the distant city's towers stabbed up into the smoky sky. The Iron Warriors did not look back. They drove forward, straight toward the heart of the Tau war machine. The world between the bastion and the city had become a grave. The 6 Iron Warriors marched through it without slowing. Fields of battlesuits lay in twisted rows, their sleek hulls buckled and burned, limbs splayed at impossible angles. Ruined devilfish transports lay half buried in craters, hulls split open to spill their dead crews into the ash. The earth itself was a patchwork of impact bowls and blackened scars where shells had struck and Tau armor had died. Damakos led, boots grinding through powdered bone and shattered ceramite. His chain axe hung at his side for now, teeth clogged with dried blood, its spirit growling faintly in his grip. Bolt pistol in hand, he walked in a straight line that existed only in his helm displays, cutting through the massive wreckage with the inevitability of a falling hammer. Behind him, Castigar strode like a walking fortress, Terminator plate cracked and scorched, Thunderhammer resting against his shoulder. Vorl marched at his other flank, heavy weapon harness digging into battered shoulder plates, launchers swiveling to sweep any sign of resistance with contemptuous bursts. Karzaton moved in their shadow, mechadendrites flexing, optics flickering as he sampled the machine wreckage around them, always looking for more to subvert or repurpose. Dreven and Scallion brought up the rear, armor marked with the scars of days of siege, guns held ready. They fired as they walked. A wounded fire warrior dragged himself along the edge of a crater, one arm gone, armor smeared with his own blood. He lifted his head at the sound of approaching steps, eyes widening as the giant iron forms loomed above him. He began to speak, some half-formed invocation to the greater good. Vorl put a bolt round through his helm without breaking stride. "Greater good," the Havoc muttered over the open channel, letting his words bleed into any Tau frequency still listening. Greater waste, greater disappointment.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Further on, a Kroot tried to rise from beneath a pile of its own dead, pinions slick, beak snapping weakly. Castigar's hammer descended once, turning the entire writhing heap into a flat smear of armor and bone. He did not bother to look down. "Count them," Damakos voxed on a broad bandcast, his voice echoing in the ears of any Tau whose comset still functioned. "Stand in your trenches and do as you were taught. Estimate, project, calculate. 1 million assets. Now look at the fields you have made. He gestured with his bolt pistol at the charnel plain through which they walked. This is your mathematics, he said. This is your proof. The data feeds into the command city carried his voice as much as they carried imagery. Chasseau Tashivar Kaisrin stood in the heart of that city within the crystal span of the primary command dome and watched with a tightening gut. Hololithic projectors painted the route of the enemy in pale light across a three-dimensional display. A single hostile unit, a single malignant knot of crimson, burned a line straight from the ruined bastion toward the central spire. It had sliced through 3 siege lines already. It had ignored attempts at interdiction. It moved with an unerring directness that mocked every attempt to encircle or divert it. Around the chasseau, staff officers spoke in rapid, low tones. "We can evacuate to secondary command centers," one urged. "Extract the ethereal cast and senior command to safer locations and re-establish control from there. There is no need to risk leadership assets in one location. To flee in the face of an enemy we outnumber so completely would damage morale beyond repair," another countered. "The troops look to this place, to the ethereal. We must hold here. For the greater good, we must stand." The ethereal at the chasseau's side listened without interrupting, his pale features inscrutable, his presence a calm. "The greater good shatters, nor shall we. Our duty is not to our lives, Chasseau, but to the belief of those who fight in our name." The Chasseau met his gaze, saw no trace of doubt there, and bowed his head. "As you wish," he said. "Then we prepare this city to receive them. Every cadre capable of moving will stand between the enemy and this dome. We will show our worlds that even in the face of such monsters, the fire cast does not break. Your courage honors us all," the ethereal replied. Outside, the Iron Warriors reached the outskirts of the city hab and met that courage head-on. The neat open spaces of the staging ground gave way to tight streets and towering hab blocks, Tau architecture rising in smooth curves and clean lines. Transitways hung like arteries between buildings. Plaza spaces had become barricades, overturned pulse transports, hastily erected shield walls, platform-mounted weaponry. Sniper drones lurked on elevated ledges, optics glowing as they tracked the advancing giants. Fire warriors huddled behind barricades, rifles braced through firing slits. The first volley of pulse fire hit the Iron Warriors like a horizontal rain. Shields crackled where they survived. Armor rang where they did not. Vol staggered as 3 rounds struck his pauldron and upper arm, energy sinking through cracked ceramite, turning flesh beneath to numbed heat. Castigar felt a dozen rounds spatter against his chest plate, leaving scorched impact rosettes. They marched on. Damakos raised his pistol and fired once, the bolt round punching through a shielded firing slit to turn the sniper drone behind it into a mess of cables and sparking circuitry. A heartbeat later, he tossed a grenade into the same opening. The blast blew out the section of wall, collapsing the barricade inward and burying the fire warriors behind it. "Do you see?" he voxed, letting his voice ride the open channels. "Your straight streets, your ordered blocks. All it takes is a fallen wall, a broken line, and they become killing lanes." Karzaton's mechadendrites seized a Tau traffic tower, steel limbs punching into its control nodes. He whispered to the machine, feeding it corrupt instructions. The tower's grav couplings screamed and failed. It toppled, a ribbon of metal and glass falling across a major avenue, crushing a freshly assembled line of defenders and sealing off one of the routes the Tau had planned to use to flank the intruders. Melter charges turned building fronts into slag, Iron Warriors stepping through molten gaps where doors had once stood. Fire points on upper levels became liabilities as Castigar's hammer struck support pillars, dropping sections of structure onto their own garrisons. Every hiding place became another piece of ammunition in the hands of siege masters. The city gauntlet bled them, but it bled the Tau more. In the midst of that urban maze, as crisis teams tried to box them in, a message came through Vol's command feed. Armored reserves converging from the eastern grid. he said, relaying it to the others. If they link up behind us, they cut our path and pen us in these streets. I will deny them that link, Scallion said. Damokos glanced back at the Iron Warrior. Scallion's armor was cracked and soot-stained. Heavy bolter mag fed and ready in his grip. His helm lenses burned steadily, without hesitation. Behind him lay a shattered arterial roadway, one of the elevated transit routes that cut through the city, now half collapsed from shelling. It narrowed ahead into a choke point, 2 toppled towers creating a jagged canyon. That road is their fastest approach, Castigar said, following Damokos's gaze. Hold it, and the rest of us have time to punch, deeper. I will hold it, Scallion repeated. There was no pride in the statement, no boast, just a simple acknowledgement of task and outcome. Damokos nodded once. Expend wisely, he said. Scallion turned and took position on the broken roadway, bracing the heavy bolter against a section of jagged ferrocrete. Ammunition drums lay at his feet in neat stacks. His rune flickered amber for a heartbeat on Damokos's display, then steadied. The warband moved on, vanishing into the network of streets beyond. Scallion waited. It did not take long. The first devilfish noses appeared around a shattered overpass, engines whining as they pushed rubble aside. Hammerheads followed, their hulls scarred from earlier battles, railguns swiveling to seek targets. Between them, squads of fire warriors ran, helmets gleaming, rifles ready. Scallion opened fire. The heavy bolter's roar filled the canyon, echoes ricocheting off broken walls. Shells tore into the lead devilfish. Fire warriors spilled from its ruptured grav engines. The transport lurched, listed, then slammed into the roadway, blocking the path. Fire warriors spilled from its ruptured hull and were cut down before they could reach cover. Behind the first wreck, Tau armor tried to reverse, to spread, but the narrowness of the approach betrayed them. Vehicles jostled and collided. Tracks ground against hulls. Skimmers scraped against fallen masonry. All the while, Scallion's fire walked through their ranks, leaving wrecks as roadblocks. Pulse rounds and Seeker missiles reached for him, slamming into his cover. Sections of the roadway around him shattered. Shards of ferrocrete pinged from his armor. Warning runes flared as power feeds to parts of his plate flickered and died. He kept firing. He felt something punch into his side, digging under a damaged plate. Another hit smashed into his helm, cracking one lens. His vision doubled, then steadied as secondary systems, compensated. He ignored the taste of blood in his mouth. Another drum emptied. He slammed a fresh one into place with practiced efficiency. For the Tau advancing into that corridor, it was not a man they faced. It was a point of unending fire at the end of a tunnel, a storm that would not cease. They died by the dozens, then the hundreds, piling into heaps that made their own movement even more difficult. Eventually, inevitability caught up. A series of rail rounds, finally coordinated and focused from multiple angles, smashed into the overhead structure that still hung above Scallion's position. Already weakened by bombardment, the remaining supports gave way. A whole section of the city's arterial road network came down in a screaming avalanche of stone and metal. The last thing Scallion saw before the collapse took him was another devilfish trying, futilely, to force its way through the choke point he held. He kept the trigger of the heavy bolter depressed until rubble, buried him, and armor and weapon alike vanished under the city's falling bones. His rune flickered red, then went dark on Damokos's display. Scallion expended, Vaul reported. He paid for time, Damokos said. We will spend it. Karzaton led them down. Captured schematics flickered in his helm, stolen from Tau cogitators, and cross-referenced against the whispering impressions he had coaxed from the city's infrastructure. Service access points, maintenance hatches, reactor feed lines and grav stabilizer cores. He pulled a strand from that tangled web and led the remains of the warband into it. They dropped through a shattered transit node into the Undercity. Here, the clean lines and bright surfaces of Tau design gave way to cramped tunnels and humming machinery. Coolant fog rolled along the floor, coiling around their greaves. The air tasted of ozone and recycled chemicals. Grav generators throbbed behind bulkheads, their bass hum a constant presence. Light was sparse and sickly, flickering strips that buzzed as they marched past. Drones drifted the corridors down there, maintenance units repurposed as security psychers by nervous Earthcast technicians. Karzaton reached out to them with Binharic snarls and warp-whispered promises. Most turned aside, accepting new orders without understanding why. A few resisted. Vorl and Dravan reduced those to scrap with curt bursts of fire. The path wound through reactor chasms where great cores pulsed with restrained power, heat shimmering in visible waves. They passed over narrow utility bridges, the glow from the depths painting their armor in hellish hues. At one point, a grav stabilizer failure had warped the floor, leaving a section of corridor twisted as if gripped by some colossal hand. They pushed through it, boots clanging on warped plates. At last, Karzaton halted before a heavy access door reinforced beyond the norm, its edges warded by clean, precise Tau glyphs. Beyond this, he said, the Central Command District, their last shell of defense around the dome. Open it, Damakos said. Karzaton's mechadendrites stabbed into access ports. Sparks flew, the glyphs flickered, then guttered out. The door ground open with a reluctant shriek. They stepped out into a different world. The Central Command District had been built as a statement. Wide plazas of smooth white stone radiated out from the base of the command dome, their surfaces once polished to mirror brightness. Towering statuary of ethereals and warriors stood at prescribed intervals, their forms now stained by ash drifting down from the sky. Trees in carefully spaced planters had withered and blackened under the rain of soot. Now those plazas were defensive lines. Crisis suits waited in tight formations, weapons already aimed. Broadside teams squatted behind shield emitters, their heavy railguns tracking with ponderous menace. Honor Guard fire warriors in ceremonial markings stood in ranks, rifles ready, helmets locked. At their center, a cluster of robed figures and officers gathered at the base of the dome stairs, the ethereal among them, like a still point in a sea of tension. Iron warriors emerged from the access tunnel like a blight. Pulsefire met them at once. Energy blasts struck their armor, leaving fresh scorches. Shields flared and died. Castigar's plate shook as a rail round glanced off his shoulder, sending spiderweb cracks racing across the ceramite. Damakos walked forward into that storm. He switched his vox to the command frequencies Karzaton had already infiltrated and let his voice carry across the plazas, into helm speakers and command relays. Chassot, he said, ethereal. You stand in the heart of your careful city, wrapped in your straight lines and your perfect circles. You think this means you are safe. Crisis teams shifted, pilots exchanging uneasy glances. The ethereal lifted his head, eyes narrowing as he listened. You believed in numbers, Damakos went on, each word cold as a shell casing. You believed in technology, in harmony, in the greater good. You thought war was a matter of proper equations, of acceptable ratios and losses. You built models and told yourself stories of inevitability. He raised his chain axe, pointing its stained teeth toward the dome. We are inevitability, he said. We are siege, ruin, and betrayal. We are the ledger at the end of your story. This world will be remembered only as a footnote in Perturabo's record of broken fortresses, a minor work, a study piece. For a heartbeat, the firing slackened, Tau unnerved by the sheer confidence in his tone. The ethereal stepped forward, his own voice carrying across the battlefield with a calm, resonant weight. You are monsters of a failed empire, he said. Your primarchs burned their own dreams. You are the echo of a dying age. The greater good is the future. It survives you. It will outlast even this. Damakos laughed, the sound grinding like stone. We will see how your future fares without a tongue to speak it, he said. Castigar, he voxed, switching back to the squad net. "Break their line." The Terminator champion activated his personal teleport beacon. There was a flash of pale light, a crackle of energy, and Castigar vanished from the Iron Warrior's front rank. He reappeared an instant later amid the densest cluster of crisis suits, his arrival marked by a shockwave that knocked nearby Tau from their feet. His Stormbolter roared the moment his boots touched the pristine stone, shells smashing into suit joints and sensor suites. Battlesuits staggered and fell. One tried to bring its plasma rifle around. Castigar's hammer crashed into its torso, folding the frame inward and sending it tumbling into its fellows. At the gate, DeMarcos and the others charged. Vol swept the flanks with launcher fire, shells bursting among honor guard, squads, and scattering them. Dreven hurled crack grenades into broadside nests, explosions ripping their emplacements apart. Karzaton targeted shield generators with focused bursts and warp-tainted scrap code, causing emitters to flicker, overload, and die, their protective domes collapsing at the worst possible moments. They hit the command dome's outer defense ring like a living battering ram. Pulse rifles barked at point-blank range, their shots sparking from ceramite or burning new wounds in armor. Iron Warrior chain blades and power fists answered in kind, tearing through carapace and battlesuit frame alike. The pristine stone of the plazas cracked and ran dark with spilled blood, Tau and mortal auxiliary alike falling beneath the deliberate, relentless advance. Inside the dome, hololiths flickered as stray shots shattered projectors. Tactical overlays dissolved into static. Tau iconography, etched into the walls and inlaid in the floors, broke under the weight of armored boots. At the far end of the chamber, backed by a handful of surviving guards and officers, the Ethereal and Chasseux Tashavar Kaiserin stood together. The Chasseux's armor was scuffed and his face lined with fatigue, but his posture remained rigid. The Ethereal stood as he had always stood, serene, expression grave, eyes sharp. Damokos walked toward them, axe at his side, boots crunching on shattered glass and fallen drones. The survivors of his warband fanned out, weapons tracking the last ready rifles pointed their way. The Ethereal spoke first. "You have killed so many," he said. "For what? For some ancient hatred? For the glory of a Primarch who will never know this place existed?" "For Perturabo," Damokos said simply. "For the beauty of a finished siege. For the lesson your corpses will write into the stars." "The horror of this will echo through our empire," the Ethereal said. "Our people will grieve, they will rage, and they will grow, stronger for it. The greater good does not end with the death of one world." Damokos stepped close enough to smell the sterile scent of Tau robes and city air layered beneath the tang of fear. "The greater good ends with the death of the ones who tell it," he said. He raised his chain axe almost lazily, and in one contemptuous blow took the Ethereal's head from his shoulders. The axe did not linger, it did not carve, it simply struck, an executioner's stroke delivered with bored efficiency. The Ethereal's body folded to the polished floor, robes darkening, head rolling to a halt at the base of a shattered hololith. Karzaton's scrap code seized the dome's broadcast systems in that same instant. Every active Tau comm set on the planet flickered. For a heartbeat, their users saw what their leaders saw, their Ethereal's last stance, the iron-clad giant looming over him, the single brutal strike that ended him. They heard Damokos' voice as he turned to the Chasseux. "This is the fate of your leaders," he said, loud enough to carry not just through the dome, but through the entire panicked network. "This is what your numbers buy you, nothing. Remember it as your lines collapse. Measure your terror. See how poorly it fits into your projections." The Chasseux glared at him, hands clenched, then sagged slightly as the weight of it all settled. "Kill me and you will only prove what you have always been," he said. "Murderers without purpose." Damokos shrugged. "We have purpose enough," he said, and put a bolt round through the commander's chest. the image cut off. Across the siege lines that still ringed the now ruined bastion, Tau units froze as the feed died. Comms devolved in an instant from disciplined reports to overlapping questions, shouted demands, sudden, choked declarations. Command, respond. Confirm ethereal status. Orders, we need orders. We are taking fire. Some cadres held their ground, officers barking that doctrine did not break with one life lost, that the greater good still required their sacrifice. Some troops listened. Others looked at the shattered line icons on their displays and felt something give way inside. In one trench, a fire warrior dropped his rifle and ran, ignoring his sergeant's orders. In another, an entire squad shut down their comms and dug in, firing wildly at shadows until their ammunition ran out. On a hillside above the city, a battlesuit pilot cut his thrusters and sat, armor dark, staring at the sky and wondering what any of this had bought them. Here and there, commanders tried to reassert control, to speak of honor and duty. Their words were drowned by the grinding roar of Iron Warrior Vox laughter spilling over the open channels, a harsh, jagged sound that rolled across the embattled world like distant thunder. The head was gone. The body did not yet know it was dead. The death of the ethereal tore a hole in the world. Not in the stone and steel of the sept, though those would crack soon enough, but in the invisible web that held the Tau together. Every fire warrior, every battlesuit pilot, every drone controller felt it as a sudden lurch in their gut and a terrible quiet in their ears. Orders that should have come did not. Mantras that had steadied them went unspoken. Across the planetary battle space, the neat curves of doctrine unraveled. On one siege line, a cadre commander slammed his fist against a flickering console, shouting for confirmation, for any word from command. When none came, he did what he had been trained to do. He recited axioms of the greater good, his voice shaking only slightly as he ordered his troops to hold. They obeyed, more out of habit than belief, firing along pre-measured lanes at ghosts and smoke. In another trench, a young fire warrior stared at the blank space on his display where the ethereal's icon had been and felt something inside him come loose. The next time the order to advance came through, he did not hear it. When the sergeant grabbed his shoulder, he shrugged him off and climbed out of the trench in the opposite direction, legs carrying him towards some imagined safety beyond the horizon. Elsewhere, a battlesuit team gathered in a shattered courtyard, armor scorched, suits patched with field repairs. Their leader, armor marked with kill glyphs, listened to the panicked babble on the comnet, then cut through it with a single hard word: enough. He spoke of honor, of duty to the fallen ethereal, of the need to show the Firecast would not crumble. He did not mention the odds. He did not mention the 10 iron-clad monsters at the heart of the storm. He simply picked a direction where he knew the enemy must be and ordered his team forward in a last, clean thrust. They died screaming their oaths to a philosophy that no longer had a voice. Through that chaos strode the Iron Warriors. The command dome had become their workshop. Karzaton hunched over the primary grid interface. Mechadendrites plunged deep into the crystalline banks. Tau glyphs flickered across the displays, then warped into jagged, crawling runes. The hololithic map of the planet juddered as if in pain, the lines of orbital paths and defense platforms twisting under the intrusion. Damakos stood at his shoulder, helm lenses reflecting the ghostly arcs of orbiting guns and station platforms. "Can you hold them?" he asked. "I can possess them," Karzaton said. His voice came in layered tones now, Binharic harmonics threaded through the low Gothic. "Their machine spirits are tame, unused to rage. I gift them purpose." He began to chant, a litany that started as harsh code and ended as something older and darker. Symbols scrolled down the interfaces, Tau designations overwritten by Iron Warrior targeting tags. Orbital cannons that had once guarded the sept from void-born threats now hung in silence for a breath, as if considering, then turned. The first volley came from the upper atmosphere. Lance batteries spat lines of fire that lanced down through the cloud deck, carving through the sky like spears. Ground-based cannons answered, their barrels booming as they swung to new coordinates. The Tau had built their grid to overlap, to protect and reinforce. Under Kharzaton's hand, that same logic became a net of slaughter. Every fallback corridor the Firecast had prepared, every rally point marked on evacuation plans, every safe route designated for retreat or regroup became a target. Columns of refugees and withdrawing units found themselves suddenly under the crosshairs of their own sky. A road marked in bright diagrams as a secure supply artery transformed in a heartbeat into a furnace. Shells rained down along its length, turning vehicles and bodies into charred wreckage. Trenches designated as last stands filled with earth and fire as groundquake rounds slammed into their coordinates, collapsing the walls. A communications hub that had been meant as a sanctuary of order for shaken cadres became a crater in an instant, its staff and equipment vaporized by a focused orbital strike. The neat rings of auxiliary camps on the planet's far side exploded in a chain of devastation. Tents and prefabs hurled into the air or flattened by shockwaves. It was not rage that guided the bombardment. It was arithmetic. On the hololith, Damakos watched sectors wink out, one after another. Casualty estimates scrolled up the side of the display in cold, indifferent script. Hundreds of thousands, more. The numbers ticked upward, like an abacus being set to rights. "Beautiful," Vaul murmured, his voice rough with something that might have been admiration. "They built such a fine machine to shield themselves. See how well it kills them instead." "Perturabo would approve," Castigar said. "A world undone by its own lines." Kharzaton's chant rose. Black, wailed as if in agony. Barrels cracking, wailed as if in agony. Barrels cracking, housings venting fire. The warpsmith whispered to them, soothing and urging in the same breath, holding them together long enough to complete the pattern. It was not enough. Damakos wanted more. "Their land still holds," he said. "Their cities still stand upon foundations they believe stable. We will prove them wrong." He jabbed a finger at a point beneath the main city, where the grid display showed a tight cluster of geo-control indicators. "There," he said. "Their primary stabilizer array. They have tamed their world's crust, bound fault lines, shackled pressures. Break that, and the planet itself becomes artillery." Kharzaton nodded, data already flooding into his helm as he sought a path. "Access tunnels exist," he said. "Difficult, guarded, but not impossible." Dreven stepped forward without hesitation. "I will carry the charge," he said. The Iron Warrior's armor bore the scars of the long advance, plates patched where they had been cracked, hazard stripes burned and blackened. His eyes behind his lenses were steady. Damakos studied him for a heartbeat, then inclined his head. "You will carry a seismic warhead into the stabilizer core," he said. "You will arm it. You will ensure it detonates. You will not return." Dreven's vox clicked once in acknowledgement. No oath, no lament. Kharzaton handed him the device. It was a brute of a thing, squat and ugly, a cylinder banded in iron and etched with wards. It hummed faintly, as if some caged animal within shifted its weight. Tau engineers had never seen such weapons, but the Imperium had, long ago, and the Fourth Legion had taken careful notes. Dreven took its weight without effort and left without looking back. He descended into the bowels of the city, following the path. Kharzaton had cut through schematics and sensor ghosts, maintenance shafts, access ladders, service tunnels lit by failing strips. Drones that once would have challenged him floated past, their instructions overwritten, their optics blind to his passage. He met resistance eventually, crisis suits shunted down from secondary hangars, guided by frantic Earthcast signals. Drones assigned to guard the stabilizer approaches, their simplistic programming upgraded in haste to recognize any non-Tau as hostile. Dreven's bolter spoke in controlled bursts as he advanced. The seismic charge cradled against his chest with one arm. Drones shattered under his fire, limbs and housings bouncing down service corridors. Battlesuits took more effort. He sidestepped their clumsy volleys in the cramped spaces and smashed them apart at close quarters, using the charge as a blunt ram when needed, his free hand driving a combat blade into joint gaps and visor seams. Alarms howled as he breached the final bulkhead. The stabilizer chamber was a cavern of humming machinery, wrapped around a core of caged stone. Great pylons ringed the heart of the room, each sunk deep into the bedrock, their fields binding tectonic forces in invisible chains. Grav anchors pulsed in slow rhythms, their glow casting elongated shadows. Dreven walked into that engineered calm, boots echoing on the metal gantries. Tau engineers scattered, shrieking warnings. Security drones converged in a swarm, weapons cycling up. A pair of battlesuits dropped from upper platforms, landing with the heavy clang of reinforced frames. Dreven ignored his wounds as he created fresh ones. He moved with the deliberate inevitability of a falling block. Bolter rounds tore through drones and engineers alike. A battlesuit charged, jets flaring. Dreven met it head-on, shouldering its impact, using its own momentum to hurl it sideways into a bank of control consoles. Sparks flew. Field indicators spiked and jittered. The gauntlets moved with the ease of long gauntlets moved with the ease of long practice, disengaging safeties, priming fuses, unlocking the caged heart of the weapon. Warning runes crowded his vision as Tau fire finally punched through his battered armor. He felt heat blossom in his side, in his back, his limb servos stuttering with the damage. He did not let it interrupt the pattern of his work. He thumbed the final activation stud and spoke a single word into the squad vox. Done. The charge detonated. The stabilizer's song turned to a scream. For a heartbeat, the forces chained there pushed back. Field harmonics surged. Grav anchors spat arcs of hard light. Pylons glowed white-hot. Then the binding snapped. The world shook. On the surface, in the plazas around the dome, the ground bucked. Buildings groaned, their foundations twisting, as hidden stresses ripped free. Cracks raced across the streets, opening into yawning chasms that swallowed fleeing Tau whole, armor and bodies and vehicles tumbling into darkness. Beyond the city, fault lines woke. Hills collapsed, valleys heaved upward. Entire defensive sectors vanished into newly opened ravines or slid into boiling seas as coastlines fractured. Dust clouds rose in vast rolling walls, turning day into a dim, choking twilight. In the command district, Demarcos felt the tremor through his boots as he stood upon a shattered balcony overlooking the dying city. Flames licked from ruptured hab blocks. Towers leaned at impossible angles, their clean lines broken into jagged teeth. In the distance, a Manta gunship struggled to keep level as the air itself churned, then tilted and augured into the side of a collapsing arcology. On the plaza below, a crisis battlesuit clawed its way free from a pile of rubble, armor dented, one arm actuator hanging limp. Rail shots had scored its frame. Blast marks blackened its chest. It stood unsteadily, then straightened as best it could, its optics burning with stubborn purpose. Shasso Tashava Kaiserin had not died in the dome. The bolt round Damokos had put into his chest had taken him from that place, bleeding and broken, but the Tau were very good at not letting important assets die when they could still be of use. They had sealed him into his suit, grafting armor and life support around meat that should have failed, binding him to the frame like a penitent to a shrine. Now, with everything else torn away, he walked the plaza on failing servos, weapons ruined, everything around him on fire. Demarcos dropped from the broken balcony to meet him, landing in a shower of stone fragments. His armor was a patchwork of damage, plates cracked and pitted, hazard stripes obscured by soot and dried blood. His chain axe hung at his side, teeth dulled, his bolt pistol almost empty. The two commanders regarded one another across the heaving ground. "You should be dead," Demarcos said, voice carrying above the roar of shifting stone and burning structures. "So should you," the Shasso answered, His words filtered through damaged Vox systems. Yet here we are. You stand on a dead world, Damakos said. Your ethereal is a carcass cooling on my floor. Your grid is ours. Your million soldiers are ash and wreckage. What do you hope to gain by this last gesture? The battlesuit's damaged arm twitched, useless. Meaning, the Chasseur said, if I cannot save this world, I can at least decide how I leave it. Damakos tilted his helm slightly. Meaning, he repeated, you still cling to that. The ground shuddered again, a building in the distance finally giving up its struggle and toppling, crushing whatever still lived beneath it. Smoke smeared the sky. The air tasted of metal and dust. The greater good is more than one planet, the Chasseur said. It is more than me. It is a chain of choices that leads away from this, from you. Even this defeat will teach us, hurt us, shape us. You will not have the last word. You are wrong, Damakos said. There is no chain, only cycles. Siege, betrayal, ruin. You build, we break. You hope, we come. That is all there is. He raised his chain axe. The Chasseur tried to raise his remaining arm to block, damaged servos whining. The crisis suit lurched forward, more from stubborn will than mechanical capacity. For a heartbeat, the two closed like duelists. Damakos did not fight like a duelist. He stepped aside from the suit's clumsy lunge and drove his axe into the already cracked chest plate, teeth biting deep into composite and metal. With his free hand, he gripped the battlesuit's torso and wrenched. Armor tore. Seals blew out in stuttering jets of vapor. He ripped the cockpit open like the lid of a crate. Inside, the Chasseur glared up at him, face pale, armor stained, an array of tubes and support lines plugged into his body. Pain burned in his eyes, but so did something like defiance. Damakos caught him by the front of his harness and hauled him out into the choking air, holding him aloft as Draven had held that first fire warrior on the staging ground. To all Tau who still cling to life, he voxed, broadcasting on every frequency Kharzaton could feed him. This is your last commander. This is the sum of his mathematics. Look upon him. See what your future buys you. The Chasseur tried to speak. Blood flecked his lips. You will be forgotten, he managed. All of this, all of you. We will write over it. We will build something in its place. You are only a wound. We are the healing. Damakos considered him for a moment, then gave a short, humorless laugh. You misunderstand the nature of wounds, he said. He snapped the Chasseur's neck with a single, efficient twist and let the body drop. The plaza continued to tremble. The battlesuit behind him sagged and fell, finally still. When the quake storm subsided, the world was changed. The cities were broken, their neat lines shattered into jagged ruins. Highways had become broken ridges or swallowed trenches. Coastal defenses lay drowned as new bays opened and old ones collapsed. The sky was a permanent bruise of ash, lit from beneath by the fires that still burned in what remained of the Great Sept. Damakos stood with Castigar, Kharzaton, and Vorl on the ruined steps of the command dome, looking out over the devastation. Of the 10 who had fallen from the void, 4 remained. Sestian lay under a fallen wall, Garion in the breach, Lorcian in the courtyard star, Scallion beneath the collapsed roadway, Dreven in the stabilizer chamber's grave. Another brother's name had already begun to blur at the edges of Damakos's ledger, expended somewhere in the long grind between Bastion and City. He had tallied each of them. He had tallied the enemy too. Roughly 1 million Tau under arms at the onset, he said, as if talking through a problem on a slate. Auxiliaries, armor, air assets besides. Now? Small pockets perhaps, in caves and deep shelters, in armories we have not yet breached. A fraction of a fraction. The rest. He gestured with his axe at the blackened horizon. Vorl, armor cracked, launcher slung empty on his back, gave a dry chuckle. The rest are accounting entries, he said. Rounds expended, targets neutralized. A pleasing ratio. Karzaton said nothing. He was listening to the machines. The planetary grid still hummed under his hands, though much of it had burned out under the strain. The orbital platforms that survived had long since spent their ammunition, but their communication arrays remained. He whispered to them, sent out signals laced with warp echoes. Far above, beyond the ash clouds, those signals leapt into the void. Somewhere in the dark between stars, receivers on rusted hulls pricked up like carrion beasts scenting a corpse. The cursed silhouettes of a Chaos fleet adjusted their course by infinitesimal degrees, turning toward the broken sept like vultures turning on the scent of blood. "This world will not stay dead," Karzaton said at last. "We will fill it with forges, with engines, with batteries that speak in the tongue of ruin. Its people will become feedstock. Its cities will become casings." "A suitable end," Castigar said. "They built it with such hope." Damakos looked up at the cracked vault of the command dome. "Incomplete," he said. "We have not yet honored the Primarch." They set about rectifying that. Within the dome's ruined interior, they tore down what was left of Tau statuary. Serene, ethereal faces shattered under mailed fists. Idealized warriors in smooth armor toppled, their limbs broken off to be used as raw material. Shattered battlesuit parts joined them. Hunks of armor and weapon housings fused together with melted stone and seized metal. Slowly, a shape took form. It was crude, a jagged icon more suggestion than likeness, but every iron warrior who stood before it knew what it meant. A towering figure stitched together from the wreckage of an alien dream, hunched over an anvil of broken world, eyes represented by twin burning lenses scavenged from ruined drones. Perturabo. They knelt, those 4 survivors of 10, armor creaking, the ash drifting down around them like the ghosts of 1,000,000 dead. Damakos spoke the words, voice low and steady. "Primarch," he said, "we lay this work at your feet, a world taken not for glory, nor for conquest alone, but as an exercise in proper siege. 10 warriors, 1,000,000 dead, a planet broken along calculations you would approve." He did not ask for approval. He did not expect praise. The Primarch's regard, even imagined, was as cold as iron. This was not about love. It was about satisfaction. "We will build your engines here," Karzaton added. "Hammer their ideals into plating for demon hulks. Chain their ghosts into targeting spirits. Every piece will speak of your craft." They rose from their knees and walked out onto the broken steps once more, leaving the crude idol glaring down at the empty command chamber. Time moved on. Years later, a ship of dubious loyalties drifted near the dead sept. Its holds were filled with scavenged relics and stolen texts, its crew an assortment of renegades and cultists. Among them walked a remembrancer of sorts, a chronicler of wars no one had commissioned and no one wished recorded. He stood at a viewport, watching the world tumble slowly beneath the ship's hull. The once bright planet was dimmed now, its atmosphere stained. Great scars marred its surface where tectonic convulsions had torn it open. Here and there, the dull glow of forges burned like coals in old wounds. "They call it the Siege of the Million," he said, quill scratching across stained parchment. "Though no one agrees on the exact tally, some say fewer, some say more. Numbers always drift in the telling." He wrote of 10 iron warriors who had fallen from the sky into a storm of fire, of bastions built from bodies and hulls, of 1,000,000 Tau soldiers who had marched in neat lines into the jaws of a calculation they had never imagined. There were discrepancies in every account he gathered. In some, all 10 survived to the end. In others, only one walked the ruined steps when the last shell fell. Some claimed the ethereal died pleading. Others, that he spat defiance to his last breath. One tale insisted that the Chasseur had escaped into the void to carry the story home. It did not matter. All the stories agree on one thing, the remembrancer murmured. ink drying on the final line. The world fell, the Tau bled, and in the ledger of the Fourth Legion, it was not even a great work, merely a satisfactory one. He looked down at the ruined planet, then up at the dark where other worlds still spun in ignorant optimism. In the far future, there is only war, he whispered, as if reciting an old proverb. And sometimes, there is not even a reason, only iron, doing what iron does. He closed the book on the Siege of the Million. Outside, the dead sept turned on, its cracked crust sheltering new forges and fresh guns, its old name forgotten under layers of rust and ash.